How's it going, guys? My name is Tavarish, and today is a Sunday show. This is the part of the week where I tell you things that are on my mind and answer a few of your questions. So sit back, relax, and this is going to be fun. So before we start, I want to make sure you guys know that all my shirts, the shirts in my Teespring store, the shirts that I have designed, all the proceeds from that are going to go to hurricane relief. So those devastated by Hurricane Irma, Maria, and Harvey really need our help, and there are people that have been flooded out. There are people that don't have power. The U.S. and the Caribbean specifically got hit really hard by hurricanes this hurricane season. So let's make sure that we help out our fellow man. So yeah, check it out in the link below. So let's take a more laid-back approach today. I'm going to talk about something that's been on my mind for a little while. Now, the cars I mentioned, they have some redeeming feature, either their handling or their looks or their power delivery, something that is betrayed by their automatic-only transmissions. But you can actually get manual transmission conversions for these cars, whether it's a DIY or an aftermarket solution. So these cars basically have a fatal flaw in that they only have slush boxes and 2 pedals. And this is why you should change them. Our first car is a Subaru SVX. Now this car is, it's an interesting one because it is Subaru's foray into having a 6-cylinder. It's not an inline 6, it's not a V6, it's a flat 6, sort of like you see in a Porsche. Except that this flat 6 was quite reliable. It's actually more reliable than the Porsche ones. And it didn't make a ton of power, but it made enough power. It made like 200-something horsepower. And it was in a car that was so late 80s and early 90s that it hurts. Like, it's very, very of its era, but it looked really awesome. It had these cool split side windows, and it looked like a wedge. It had that wedge shape. But the problem was that car was made as a Grand Touring car, and it never made it as a sports car, as a sports coupe. And I think that it could have been a more sporty or a more GT car if it had a manual transmission option. Now, of course, the Subaru SVX never came with a manual transmission, but that didn't stop people from converting on their own. So since Subaru has basically all Lego parts in which a 1989 car will interchange with a car from 2005, then that means that the EJ33, I believe that's the EJ33 engine in that car, you can basically bolt up a later model 5-speed or even a 6-speed transmission. Now, I'm not sure what the particulars are on this. I'm sure that you'll have to do some custom fabbing and custom parts as far as mounting the transmissions and drive shafts and stuff. But it still is very doable. There are people driving around with a manual swap SVX, and they sound awesome, and it looks like they're really fun to drive. So I think that is one of those things where you can get it done for quite cheaply. I mean, probably less than 10 grand all in, even if you had another shop do it rather than do it yourself. You can get a really good car that's both rare and has really good performance, well, adequate performance, and a good responsive 5-speed with 3 pedals. I think that is a really good value for money. The next car that is unsurprisingly awesome with a manual transmission is a 98 to 02 Honda Accord Coupe. Now, Honda Accord obviously isn't exactly a name synonymous with performance, but oddly enough, the engine is actually very, very good. So that has the J30 engine. It was a V6 single overhead cam that made about 205 horsepower, 195 torques. And one thing that's really interesting about that car is when you give it like a cold air intake or you remove that the stock resonators from the intake, you can hear that VTEC switchover really well. That engine actually responds very well to superchargers and turbochargers and nitrous. But the problem is, on that car, it has an automatic transmission that is not only slow and dim-witted, but it is inherently unreliable. There is a design flaw in that car where basically the torque converter or the valve body or something basically just craps to bed. And it's not a matter of if, but when. Because every single Honda Accord owner, Honda Accord V6 owner, knows that the automatic transmission is just a ticking time bomb. And if you haven't had it replaced or rebuilt, then you will in the future. But there is another solution. So you can take an 03 CL Type S, which did come in a 6-speed, and you can swap over all the stuff into your Honda Accord and you'll basically make it into something that is more reliable, way faster, more fun to drive, and also looks pretty good. I always love the looks of those cars. They are long cars, they're front wheel drive, but they are decent enough. They are of their era, and they're very good looking for what they are, especially since you can buy one for around $2,000 because of those automatic transmission issues. Now, it's not the easiest thing in the world to swap them over. I did an article on Jalopnik about doing this, and I referenced a forum post on a guy chronicling his foray into this automotive endeavor. But it should be something that you guys can do at home, especially if you're sort of mechanically inclined, and you can tackle something like this without getting in over your head. But expect parts to be around the $2,000 to $3,000 mark. But even then, for less than $5,000, you'll have a Honda Accord that has pretty good reliability as far as the engine. The engine is damn near bulletproof, and you'll have a 6-speed manual transmission behind it, and that car will be damn good to drive. And the last car that's really good with the manual, I mean, it's not the last car, it's not an exhaustive list, but the last car I want to talk about today is a 90s Chevy Impala SS. And the Impala SS had the LT1 engine, and it was basically like a police interceptor package, but it had a little more oomph, and they were usually darker colors. It was the same body as a Caprice, but it was a little bit faster. It was like the Marauder, like the Mercury Marauder versus the Crown Vic. Now, they did have 9C1 interceptors. Those are the police interceptors with the Caprice, but the Impala just looked so much better. It looked more menacing. It was a modern-day muscle car. Well, it's not modern day anymore because it's 20 years old, but it was a modern day back then muscle car. The problem is they only came in automatic. But there are a few aftermarket companies that do manual transmission conversions, and that's basically the same bolt pattern. The LT1 and the LS1 engines as well, they have bolt patterns for those. And you can get a kit for around $2,000, so including the cost of the car, which you can get for around $5,000, all in, let's say you pay a shop to do it, you'll be less than $10,000. You'll essentially have a V8 American muscle car with a manual transmission on the floor where it should be. And you can't really, it does not get any better than that. I'd love to drive one of these cars. I don't actually have an experience with driving these cars. I have been in a Caprice 9C1, so it is sort of similar, but these cars are a bit floaty, but I think that they can be made into some good handling cars as well with some aftermarket mods. So with the entire package, with the fact that this car is huge and it can fit a bunch of people and it can fit a bunch of luggage, and it could be a really, really good daily driver, especially if you like spirited runs. So yeah, I think that's a good value. So it is time to answer some questions. And the first question comes to us from Twitter. This is from a person called Blake Pringle. And Blake asks, are cold air intakes worth the money? So this all depends on a lot of different factors. So first of all, what money are you talking about? Because there are cold air intakes that are by name brands like AEM and AFE and stuff like that cost $200 to $400 depending on what they are. And if you're talking about that, then maybe they're not worth the money, but there are eBay knockoffs that are literally 30 to 40 bucks, and it's the same basic design, and all you have to do is change the whatever crappy cone filter that they put on there with something better, and you'll have essentially the same thing as a name brand. So in that case, they might be worth the money. As far as upped performance, I'm not sure that they're really that effective, just because cold air intakes, what they usually do, what they're supposed to do, they're supposed to take air from the more dense part of your, surrounding your engine bay, and they're supposed to divert it to your engine. So basically your engine is getting colder, more dense air. And the issue with that is that sometimes cold air intakes don't really take more dense air, they take it from the engine bay itself. So there's like a famous intake on the Nissan Maxima. It's an InGen cold air intake. But what it does is it reroutes the intake piping between the engine, the hot engine, and the hot radiator. So this is basically a low pressure zone with really high temperature, and it's not helping anybody. It actually hurts performance, even though it sounds a little better just because you have less restriction and more NVH, noise, vibration, and harshness from the intake stream. But if you're talking about more performance-oriented cars, I really don't think that that's that's the case. I mean, cars nowadays, they're meant to have as much performance as the engine will give them. Obviously, to a safe extent. They don't want to make it so, if you rev this thing to its red line, then you risk blowing the engine. But they do have a ton of R&D into what makes a really good intake in all situations. So whether it's hot or cold or rainy or what have you, there's millions and millions of dollars that go into the intake systems, and to think that you can just take a tube and go, well, this is clearly better. I don't think that that's necessarily the case. So it is it's a case by case basis. But I think that more often than not, the stock airbox will do better. So maybe get a better flowing filter and have that be the end of it. But if you want to hear your engine more, a short ram or a cold air intake will definitely do the job. But I think I will be revisiting this in in a more dedicated episode, where I talk about the differences between where the engine gets its air from, and how it manifests itself into more power or less power or heat soak or whatnot. I think it's a really good topic, and thanks for asking that question, Blake. Our next question on Twitter comes to us from Dean Anderson, and he says, cars available now in 10 years' time, do you think that they will be complicated to work on for a home mechanic? Now, I've seen that argument posted in a lot of different places, that cars today are very complicated to work on. Honestly, I don't think that they are, because software exponentially gets cheaper to produce. So you're gonna have solutions for different software issues pretty available, I think, in the next 10 years. Let's take, for example, the Star Diagnostic Scanner that Mercedes has. So if you buy one of these from the manufacturer or what have you, if you buy an OEM official product, then it's going to cost you many, many thousands of dollars. It's going to be very, very expensive, sometimes prohibitively expensive if you don't have multiple cars, if you don't have multiple Mercedes-Benzes. So if you just have one, if you're a hobby, if you just have a hobby and you want to program something on your car and you just want to diagnose things on a dealer level, then it might not make sense to get it, except for the fact that you can now get aftermarket solutions for a fraction of the cost. So let's say the Star Diagnostic Scanner costs $2,500 or $4,000 or what have you. You can get an equivalent by an aftermarket company, whether it's in China or whatever, for around $400 to $700. So it still is a little bit, it still is a bit of money, but that makes it now accessible to the home DIY wrencher. So I think that in the future, most of the problems are going to be software based, and also we're going to have a better understanding of how stuff like GDI or the direct injection engines work. So we're going to have a better idea of how they age, and it's very all the principles are essentially the same. Internal combustion is internal combustion. Components may change, and as time goes on, components may get more prevalent and the price goes down, or they stop using those components and price goes up. So I think with time, it's only going to get better. And right now they might be hard to work on, but it's not necessarily the case later on, unless there's a government mandated switch to electric cars sometime. But I doubt that's going to happen. So yeah, I think we should be all right. Our last question from Twitter comes to us from Auto Technica, and they write, "What motivates you to work on basket cases?" Yeah, what motivates you to work on basket case cars so much? I mean, it would probably be easier to buy a nice car for a little bit more money. Yeah, it probably would be, but I like working on projects. I like finding stuff. I like cars with stories. I like that MR2 because it's $1,000, but you can see where people worked on this car, and you can see sort of the vision that they had for it, but it didn't quite get there. Well, it was really short of getting there. But I like cars like that because they're cheap, and if something goes wrong, you're not out a lot of money. For me, it's always been a value proposition, and it doesn't really matter about the dollar amount. I mean, obviously, it matters if I can't afford it, but if I can, then how much money, how much value can I get for my money? And that's the number one thing for me. Our next question comes to us from Marius Olaru from Facebook, and Marius says, "When are you going to buy a diesel?" I already have one. It's the 7.3 liter turbo diesel Power Stroke in my F350, but maybe they mean like a diesel car. In that case, I'm not sure because there aren't really that many diesel cars to begin with. There is like the Volkswagen TDI, and that's sort of, there's a lot of controversy surrounding those. Even though you can make a decent amount of power on those platforms, and maybe the BMW diesels, even though I really haven't seen them here. I know that they're around, but they're super rare. So I'm not sure what other diesel options I have other than VW and BMW. So maybe you guys can write in the comments. What I'd love is one of those really bad GM diesels, like an Oldsmobile diesel. I think they had a Cadillac diesel, which is like one of the worst cars ever made, because they took what is essentially a gas engine and just converted it to diesel, and it's just the most hateful thing ever. And that is one reason why Americans in general don't like diesels, is because of the stigma from those cars still going on to this day. So yeah, I'd love to drive one of those cars, maybe pick one up for cheap, but I'm not sure what car diesel I'd get. But as far as trucks, I love my F-350. That thing is awesome. Our next question comes to us from Facebook by a guy named Adam Clark Dent. He says, I have a 2007 Ford Fusion with a 3.0 V6. If I wanted to add a bit of power, acceleration really, what would be a cost-effective way to do that? I'm thinking less than $1,000. Now, realistically, there's an issue here. So a 3.0 V6 and a Ford Fusion, it's not really going to be that responsive to a lot of mods, but because there's a lot of diminishing returns after some point. So what I would do is I would just start with stuff like maybe exhaust, maybe a freer flowing exhaust, intake maybe, but depending on if it actually does something for your car. But I would look into whether they make a tune for your car, maybe make like a 93 octane or a 91 octane tune that moves the timing curve a little bit and gives you a little more power. It leans out the power band a bit, but it also makes it more efficient. That's also an option. I'm not sure if that's available for your car, but I'm sure any tuner could be amenable to something like that. And I know that 3.0 V6s are prevalent enough that they would likely have some sort of Ford aftermarket support for it. But another really easy thing to do is weight reduction. So stuff like taking out your spare tire and jack, and I don't know, if you go to the track and get, remove the back seat for the run or something. Every pound helps, and that is a really good way to make the car a little bit faster, a little more responsive. Another thing is tires. Now, tires are not something that people usually think about. They think about, oh, how can I make the engine more powerful? But tires put that to the ground more. So if you're slipping in certain situations, or if you need more grip, tires are the number one thing. The tires are the only thing from the car that touch the road. So I know that tires give a very good, a very big transformation to what the car was to what the car could be. So maybe get some stickier tires and get on a track, and then see what the car does stock, and then get better tires, and then start adding power adders. But none of that should be more than $1,000. You should definitely check the forums. I'm sure that there are Ford Fusion forums with a lot of car enthusiasts that love the platform and know what to do with those cars. Maybe there's some secret sauce, manifold or secret sauce exhaust that gives you a ton of power, to unlock. So, check that out. Go on the forums, do your research, and I think you'll be all right. Our next question comes to us from Ari Denaller on Facebook. And Ari says, will you consider modding or restoring a BMW? Now, yeah, of course, I'd always consider modding or restoring a BMW. I'm not sure what it would be, just because BMWs tend to, well, the good ones tend to be expensive, and the parts tend to be expensive. So what I was thinking was an E46 M3 that maybe had some engine trouble, and then I'd swap that over to a 2JZ. Now, I know I'd probably get a lot of hate for that, but I tend to think that engine is good when it works, but when it doesn't, it can go catastrophically bad. So I know the cooling system is basically made of plastic. It's a sealed unit, so there's a lot of pressures and plastic explodes. The E46 M3 that I had famously had the coolant tank explode, and thankfully I didn't have any blown head gaskets on that car, but I was pretty close. So on those engines, the head gasket is very prone to go if you have any sort of real overheating. But as far as a swap, I would definitely think the 2JZ is a good candidate for that car, just because they already have mounts for it, just because they have adapter plates to mount that transmission to the 2JZ, and I know that transmission can hold a lot of power. The 2JZ is sort of, it's also an inline six, and it also looks good, it's reliable, and I think that that would make the car more fun to drive because it'll have more low-end torque, and for a lot of other reasons, just parts availability and stuff like that. So that's what I'd consider. Maybe doing that same stuff that's an M5, but M5 has more torque on its side, a more low-end torque, so I don't know if I'd give that up, but I think an E46 M3 with a 2JZ would be an awesome project. Maybe I'll do one next year, but who knows? I have so much on the docket right now. Yeah, I don't have anything against BMWs. Other than the fact that they're a little bit unreliable. So that is it. I hope you guys had a fun time. I certainly did. If you'd like to ask me a question, basically anything you want, then you can reach me at The Real Tavarish. That is Instagram and Twitter. You can ask me a question on Facebook. It's facebook.com/AskTavarish. And AskTavarish@gmail is my email, and I'm pretty easy to reach. You can also see me on this Wheelwell. This actually it's a pretty cool shirt. You can DM me on Wheelwell, and I'll be sure to get back to you. But keep in mind, I do get a bit of messages. I'm not tooting my own horn. I'm just giving you the reality. Like I do get a fair amount of messages a day, so I do read every single one. So don't worry if I don't reply right away. I may reply in a few days, or something reasonable. But for some reason, if I don't reply to you, I am sorry. But until next time, this is me telling you that yeah, we had a lot of fun, and I'll see you again next time.